welcome to this snowy winter landscape watercolour tutorial for beginners. I'll be using just 3 colours, and for alternative colours check out the description below. You'll also find a link for the photograph and a full list of materials. So shall we get started? I'm using Saunders Waterford White Rough Watercolour paper, and it's a new block as you can see here, and the blocks I quite like using because it helps with the paper warping. So I'm just removing the top cover sheet there, which actually is quite a decent piece of paper here. It might be quite nice to do some pen and wash on there. I'm putting on some washi tape around the edges here. I quite like washi tape. It's very kind to my watercolour paper and stops any seepage, any paint going under the tape there. I've sketched an outline of the drawing, and as you notice from the actual photograph, I've actually taken out a few sheep to simplify things. I'm using a synthetic brush dipped in liquid soap, and I'm masking out the house here, but you don't actually have to do this. You could quite easily paint round this as well, but yes, I'm applying this masking fluid wet on dry onto the white and light of the house. I'm also going to mask out some posts in the distance there, and I'm going to allow it to dry naturally. I find if you use a hairdryer to dry masking fluid, it can be very difficult to remove, so I would suggest drying it naturally. Once your painting is dry, I'm just using 3 colours here, as I said earlier. This is ultramarine, so I'm mixing up a puddle of kind of milky ultramarine using my size 6 brush, and I'm actually using Indian red. It's only because it's in this Sennelier box. I would actually recommend light red if you have it. It's more of a terracotta colour, and it does mix really well with ultramarine. And I'm using Naples yellow deep, again because it comes in this Sennelier box, but you could use raw sienna. And if you don't have any of the red, you could use burnt sienna. So what I'm doing now, I've got my puddles of paint mixed up, and I'm wetting the sky area around the house there. Just make sure you sort of spend a little bit of time wetting the paper, letting the water soak into the membranes of the paper. It really will give you more time because it won't dry as quick. I'm also putting my framing tape there to allow the painting to be on a little tilt there. It allows the paint to flow down more naturally and stops puddles as well, and it helps you to avoid back runs. I'm using my size 10 brush. You could use a larger brush actually, painting wet into wet these lovely colours, and I started at the blue sort of end and then sort of went in the middle there with my palette with more of the Indian red. As you see there, going towards the horizon, I've got a little bit more Indian red, and I've rinsed off the brush there, and I'm going to use a little bit of the Naples yellow now, sort of brushing it on the horizon, letting it catch that Indian red with a touch of the ultramarine to create a lovely sort of light sort of colour on the horizon. Now I've swept in a little bit more of the Indian red with a touch of ultramarine just to sort of blend those colours there, sort of right up to the house, carefully painting round the house there. Don't worry if you get a little bit on the rooftops there. I'm rinsing off my brush and just using clean damp brush now just to soften that horizon there. I felt it was a little bit too dark on the horizon, so I'm tilting my board here now and spritzing just that corner there, the bottom left hand corner of the horizon there. And sometimes I find spritzing like this, tilting and just running all that dark paint off there works quite well rather than going in with a brush. And I'm just going to mop all of that up there, get rid of all that excess water. If you see, I'm really tilting, I'm making sure none of that water runs into the painting. I want it to run off to the nearest side, and it's a great way of preventing back runs and getting rid of that dark paint on the horizon. So while that's drying off, I'm painting the sheep wet on dry with my size 6 brush with some diluted Naples yellow. If you look at the photograph, which I took only just last week, you'll notice that there is no snow on the grass, but I've decided to make this a winter scene, and that's the wonderful thing about painting. You can create your own scene, and that's exactly what I'm doing here, and that's the reason why I'm painting the sheep Naples yellow, so they stand out as well, and they look lovely and soft also. I've painted a little bit of shadow underneath their bodies, and just to sort of describe some of the shadows on their legs using the Ultramarine with the Venetian red, damp into damp, using my size 4 brush. I'm painting some shadows now with the mixture of Ultramarine and Venetian red, wet on dry, so it just sort of makes them look like they're on the snow. They're casting some shadows, imaginary shadows, and I'm just softening them now with my size 4 brush. It's been diluted, it's a damp clean brush, and just softening those shadows, rinsing my brush, taking the excess water off on a paper towel and softening again, and it really does create that lovely soft glowing effect. I'm also using the paper towel to lift off as well and to soften back. I will be painting them again later, but for this first stage I wanted everything to be kind of soft and a little bit out of focus. I'm painting some imaginary shadows as well in the foreground just to give the painting some depth using my size 10 brush, wet on dry. And now I'm painting behind the top of the sheep because I felt they weren't standing out enough, using that shadow colour of Ultramarine Venetian red, wet on dry, and again softening them with a damp clean brush, getting rid of that hard edge of the watercolour paint. I've tried to keep the top of the sheep as light as possible, so when I paint this soft shadow at the top and around them, wet on dry, softening as I go, it really allows the sheep to stand out from the white light background there. So as you can see there, I'm sort of painting wet on dry, quite a palish colour though, right around the sheep there, and I'm using my paper towel. I've got a little splodge there, but it's a mixture of the Ultramarine with a touch of the Indian red there, and again I'm just painting around both those sheep there, wet on dry, just really kind of keeping everything really simple, and then softening that sort of outline that I've created there so it sort of pushes it back into the snow there. So I'm going to let my painting dry. Once your painting is dry, what I'm doing now is I'm painting the rooftop with again a mixture of the Ultramarine with a tiny touch of the Venetian red, so it's a blue grey colour. What's great about using just 3 colours, you are in control. You know, you can really sort of paint your colours with a little bit more confidence, and it really does help. So I'm carefully painting this rooftop here. I've still got the masking fluid on the front of the building, but again, if you don't use masking fluid, just paint carefully the rooftop there, trying not to get anything on the white area there. This is just one stage really on the rooftops. You're just painting one sort of flat colour, so you want to make it a more of a mid-tone. Don't make it too light, so you may have to paint over it again, but really sort of take your time using, as I am here, my size 4 brush, working wet on dry. Just ignore what I'm doing now because it's actually on masking fluid and it actually gets rubbed off. But I will paint those windows later again. I'm also painting the chimney pots here with a touch of Venetian red watered down. They are really tiny, so you only need to give a very small amount of paint and detail. Using my size 6 brush now with a mix of Ultramarine and some Naples yellow, painting wet on dry some of these distant trees and hedgerows here, trying to use the belly of the brush to get a lovely sort of textured effect as well over those white posts there, which are actually in the photograph. As you can see, they're coming through there as I paint over the masking fluid. I'm trying to keep the colour more on the blue-green side rather than putting too much of the Naples yellow because it may come forward, and I'm trying to create some depth in the painting using a touch more blue. Again, using my size 6 brush here, working wet on dry, painting bigger sort of trees here just to create a little bit of depth in the painting by using scale. Larger things come forward, smaller things recede, painting this Ultramarine and Naples yellow mix. I'm now using the same mixture, just a little bit more Ultramarine and slightly creamier paint, painting damp into damp here. So I've got some shadow colours in those trees there and even more darker shadow colours, and I'm adding a little bit of the Venetian red as well just to really create some contrast here, working damp into damp. So there's hardly any water in that wash in the palette there, and I'm using the belly of the brush and really keeping the dark shades here around the house, so there's a real contrast between the dark and light. The house is kind of the focal point, so you really want to create the biggest sort of darkest darks against the lightest light there. Still working damp into damp here, using the belly of the brush to create that texture, working my way along there. This paint is very neat here, very thick, with the ultramarine with a touch of the Indian red. There was a rooftop here. I've decided to glaze over it. I felt it was all a bit busy and the white house here was enough, so I'm just pushing it back to make it look like some more trees and foliage. I'm using a cocktail stick now to scratch into the damp paint to create the look of branches and twigs in the distance there. You can use a plastic card as well, just to say this is permanent. So it scratches the paper, so you may want to practice this technique beforehand. I'm just painting some of the features now with my size 4 brush, working wet on dry on the faces of the sheep, keeping everything really simple. Even if you can see more details in the photograph, try not to be tempted to paint them, because it will just draw you in. And it's like I always say to my students, don't paint every blade of grass, and here you just want to give an impression of the face of the sheep and nothing more, because I can't really see anymore from the distance where I am. Photographs can actually trick you into painting more than what you see in reality. When I looked at this field of sheep, which I absolutely love, by the way, and this sheep looking at me now was actually looking at me from the field as well when I was taking photographs, so I thought that was really cute. I did go a little bit wrong here. I thought I'd keep it in the video just to show you that you can lift things out, so I'm wetting it here with a clean brush just to wipe off or remove some of the paint here, and lifting off with my paper towel as well. Some of the paint has stained slightly, but not to worry, it's enough there just to create some shadow colours. I'm working with my size 4 brush here, damp into damp, with a mix of the ultramarine with a tiny touch of the Venetian red, just creating the ears, the nose, a little bit of shadow around the face, and of course the shadows between the legs, etc. at the bottom there, just trying to keep everything really simple. So I'm just sort of painting this sheep now with its head down, and it's quite nice. And you've noticed as well, I didn't paint all the sheep in the photograph. I kept it really simple, but if you want to and you like to, you could also add more sheep and change them around and position them where you think they look good. You don't have to literally copy a photograph to make your painting work. So I'm painting this sheep here that's looking in my direction again, and this time, because I sort of messed up the first sheep, I feel more confident now. I've had a little practice, so I've kept it, as you can see, really simple there, and I'm painting some shadow underneath the sheep there using my size 4 brush, working wet on dry, and I'm painting this background sheep here, just literally a couple of marks there to show the sort of shadows between the legs. Really, that's all the information you need. The rest is the sort of curvy shape, the round shape of the sheep, and it's enough to identify them, especially at that far distance there. So again, working on the right hand side here, a few little marks here and there. I find sometimes a good practice beforehand stops any sort of mistakes on there, because you feel more confident. I'm softening now with a damp clean brush, just pushing back those shadows and marks there so nothing comes forward and it all kind of sort of blends in nicely. I thought it'd be a good time just to paint some grasses wet on dry here in the foreground, coming through the snow there, using my size 4 brush. You know, less is more here. I just want to sort of create just a bit of detail in this foreground to create the depth in the painting, and it's quite effective with that dark against light with the snow as well. And I'm just softening underneath them with a damp clean brush just to sort of push those grasses into the snow, create a little bit of shadow as well. And I thought I might paint a little bit more shadow underneath the sheep just to create a little bit more depth and volume there, so they really look more 3D. And I'm just softening back again with a damp brush, just so you don't get a hard edge with the shadows there. I do think it's a good time to allow my painting to dry. Once it's dry, I am rubbing off the masking fluid with a paper towel to reveal the light and white of the house and those fence posts in the distance there. I'm just adding a little bit of the Naples yellow and ultramarine and just filling in and making some of these posts a little bit smaller. They were a little bit too large and came forward there. And I'm just adding a few more darks. Also adding a little bit of detail in the foreground here, a little bit of texture in the hedgerow there with a mix of the ultramarine and the Indian red using my size 4 brush. I'm painting the windows now wet on dry with a mixture of the ultramarine and the Venetian red. Very small, not too dark the windows. They can come forward if they're too dark. I'm just painting the windows to the side here and some details and literally some little dark marks to the right hand side as well. Remember, less is more. I'm also painting some of the shadows down the side of that chimney breast there and a little bit more under the eaves, just finessing as I go. Try to keep it really simple and just paint each area once. It's a good time now to allow your painting to dry. Once it's dry, what I'm doing now is I'm painting some shadows on the left side of the building there, obviously on the left side of the chimney as well, and just sort of finessing, just darkening things up. It's actually quite a small area, so do use a small brush if you feel comfortable. I'm just adding some darks and details with my size 4 brush, wet on dry, just to create some texture in the foliage around the house and in the distance, covering up some of those fence posts as well. I felt there was too many there, so it's always good. You can make changes in watercolour. So what I'm doing now is I'm just painting some grasses with my size 4 brush, wet on dry, just to kind of really bring that foreground forward with a mix of the ultramarine and the Venetian red. And I'm just softening and painting some shadows under the grasses and under the sheep as well, just to really sort of bring them out. Again, allow your painting to dry. Once it's dry, you don't have to do this, but I love to do this to make it a really snowy winter scene. I've watered down some Winsor & Newton white gouache. You can use white watercolour, white acrylic, or even white acrylic ink. And I'm spattering with my size 10 brush. Really load that brush and spatter. Hold the brush firmly in your hand and tap in the middle of the brush. And try not to sort of point the brush downwards. It works so much better that way. I'm removing the washi tape to reveal a lovely white border. It gives you time to assess whether you need to do any more to your painting, but also it presents your painting really nicely if you aren't going to frame it. So here is the finished painting. I really hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Any questions, please put them in the comments section. And if you'd like to see more content like this, why not think about joining my Patreon membership? You will get access to weekly exclusive tutorials, downloadable outline sketches, and you can cancel the membership anytime. And if you have any questions, please put those in the comment section. Details about the membership can be found in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. Happy painting. Bye for now.